Now, without further delay, let's begin today's event, once again titled Understand the Impact of Brazil's Weather on Coffee Crops. I'd like to introduce Matthew Ryan. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, I'm Matt Ryan, your host with ICE Futures in New York, and today I'm joined by Tropical Research Services Global Head of Research, Steve Wateridge, to explore the impacts of recent weather on supply and demand fundamentals, and Dave Margolin, meteorologist with ICE Data Services, who will discuss what data and analytics are available on our ICE Connect desktop to help you monitor and analyze weather events. Before we get started, just want to remind everybody that the material presented today is for information purposes only and is solely the opinions of the presenters and is considered off the record. Steve, why don't you jump right in?
Thank you, Matt. So I'm just going to give a brief review of the coffee market in 2021 and then look at the sort of things that we're focusing on with regard to 2022. The price action in 2021 was pretty spectacular. The Arabica market rallied by nearly 80%. I believe in a calendar year it was the best performance since 1994, and it was one of the, if not the best performing commodity in the world last year. And it was driven very much by weather in Brazil. Most of the price spikes we've seen over the last 40 years have been driven by Brazilian weather. The exception was 2010-11, when it was more a Colombia, Central American, mild Arabica issue. To give you some context, we believe that a combination of drought and frost wiped out around about 18 million bags of potential from the 21-22 and 22-23 crops, which given a global crop of 170 million bags is clearly a huge amount. There's still a lot of uncertainty about the actual size of the crop losses. I think it's fair to say that our estimates are probably on the top end of the range. We did a trawl through the internet Twitter sphere to come up with some other crop estimates, and the range is still huge. I'll address that a little bit later on, because I think this is going to be one of the key drivers of what happens in 2022. I think also the other thing we have to bear in mind with the price performance in 2021, while it was primarily driven by the impact of weather on Brazilian crops, we also had significant logistic problems. We had coffee held at origin in the wrong place. At the end of October, for instance, we believe, if you look at just 4 major producing countries, Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia and Peru, we reckon there was about 7 million bags that would normally have been shipped, but because of logistics issues, container shortages, that coffee was effectively stuck at origin. This meant that stocks in consuming countries, which should have actually increased in 2021 because it was a surplus year, declined. All the stock increase was at origin, and I think one of the issues we face in 2022 is how we move that coffee from origin to consuming countries. So, what factors are we looking at for 2022? I think probably the key factor that I'm focusing on, because I think it will tell us a lot about the size of the 21-22 and also the 22-23 Brazil crop, is the volume of exports from Brazil. As I said earlier, that there are significant differences of opinion regarding the last Brazil crop. To illustrate this, I've actually just used the numbers that we generate from our field surveys and the CONAB numbers, the Brazilian government agency. And actually, although we've got a much larger crop estimate, we believe that there was more damage to the crops than CONAB. The yield per hectare, we believe, is lower than CONAB estimate. The reason we have a higher crop estimate is that we believe that the Brazilian government massively underestimates area under production. If we used the CONAB area under production, we would come up with a much lower crop estimate than we have at the moment. We'd be knocking 11 million bags off our production estimate. Now, ultimately, it's the exports that count. That tells us how much coffee there is coming out of Brazil. If CONAB are correct, then Brazil is going to be incapable of exporting anywhere near 30 million bags of coffee in the 21-22 crop. And that compares with 45 million bags in 2021. So, we're talking about an 18 million bag decline, huge. Even on our more optimistic estimates, we still think that there's going to be a 10 million bag shortfall in exports. Ultimately, it's the exports that will decide, and we're halfway through the coffee year. We're still waiting for the December numbers, but my understanding is that December exports were around about 3.5 to 4 million bags. On that basis, cumulative exports in the first half of the crop year are actually slightly ahead of our projection. We would need to see exports fall below 2 million bags for the next 6 months for total exports to fall below 30 million bags. At the moment, if we carry on seeing 2.5 to 3 million bags over the next 6 months, then we're going to end up with exports that are slightly above 35 million bags. And that will lead us to conclude that we're still underestimating area under production. And that has huge implications for 22-23, because I think most people agree on the delta between 21-22 and 22-23. The difference is the starting point. So, if we had to reduce our 21-22 crop estimate because we were proved to be incorrect in our assumption on area under production, we would have to reduce our 22-23 crop estimate as well, and vice versa. So for me, exports out of Brazil is a key variable. Next, we have to look at, are the shipping flows normalizing? I think there are some indications at the moment that maybe towards the end of last year, we were seeing some of that coffee moving from origin to consuming countries. Certainly, the market was encouraging such a move. We had huge backwardation in Robusta. We had an unusual backwardation in Arabica. There's every incentive to try to move coffee from origin to consuming countries if it's there. We saw record exports in December from Vietnam. We saw record exports from India, near record exports from Indonesia, and a pickup in exports from Peru when they normally decline. We've also seen huge exports out of East Africa, Uganda and Ethiopia. So I think there are signs that some of that surplus that was held at origin is moving towards consuming countries. We won't see it yet. A lot of it is still on the high seas. And one of the other factors that we are looking at very closely are stocks in consuming countries, because ultimately, that tells us the availability and how tight the situation is likely to be during a deficit year. Unfortunately, although we get monthly figures from the USA and Japan, in Europe, the stock numbers are only released every 2 months. And these figures are all backward-looking. A lot of attention is therefore given to the certified stocks, which are data for which is released by ICE every day. The one warning I would put about paying over much attention to the certified stocks is that they are a relatively small proportion of the total stocks in consuming countries. If you look at the October numbers, which is the last month for which we've got reliable data for Europe, certified stocks accounted for 15% of stocks in consuming countries. So while they give an indication, they're by no means definitive, but certainly something that needs to be monitored. I think we also have to pay careful attention to consumption. Consumption for the last 2 years has underperformed long-term trends. COVID has had a big negative impact on consumption growth. In fact, 2020-2021, that 2-year period has shown the lowest growth in global consumption this century. It was quite clear that with lockdowns and the shift from out-of-home to at-home consumption, growth was curbed. And quite honestly, in Europe at the moment, we're still in lockdown, and it's unclear whether we will see a post-pandemic boom in consumption. Certainly we would hope to see that, but again, I think that's something that has to be monitored very closely in terms of the overall supply-demand balance. Fund positioning is important as well. Funds in Arabica and Robusta ended the year with significant long positions. By no means record long positions. And I think we've seen in the sugar market recently that if funds exit commodities, the door usually isn't big enough for everyone to get through. That said, we need if there is a fundamental story in coffee, there's no reason to expect that sort of liquidation. And also, I think we've got to keep a very close eye on the macro outlook, and that can work both ways. We can have a macro story in commodities that brings buying in across the board, and coffee will benefit from that. By the same token, there could be a negative macro environment where commodities become less attractive and some of that tourist money leaves, and the fund position declines because of that. So again, something to keep an eye on. And then I think last but not least, looking at the longer term, I think we do need to carefully consider the impact of the price stimulus, particularly on Brazil, but also around the rest of the world. At the moment, the Brazilian farmers are having a fantastic time. They are seeing yield prices and margins that are, out of this world by any historical comparison. And we believe that that will have a huge impact on the potential for the 23-24 crop. If you look at Arabica, normally with an off-cycle you expect a decline in production. I don't think that's going to happen this year if we get normal weather, because the 22-23 on-cycle was so poor. Given the trend in Arabica production, we think it's not unreasonable with current margins that farmers will produce up to 45 million bags for an off-cycle in Brazil. Conilon farmers are also having fantastic prices, and they're also benefiting from very good crops. And margins are great, and we believe that the potential, we're seeing plantings in Bahia, we're seeing new plantings in Espírito Santo. We think that 23-24 could comfortably reach around about 25 million bags. So potentially, come 23-24, we could see a 70 million bag off-cycle crop, given normal weather. And when you add in the stimulus to production that higher prices in 2021 have already given, I think, I would argue that for 22-23, we've actually pretty much matched the losses in Brazil. And for 23-24, we've probably added 15 million bags to the forward balance sheet. That assumes normal weather. And I think this is where we get down to the crux of the matter. Clearly, for the last 2 years, we have not seen normal weather. And that's why we've got prices where they are. That's why we've got tight supplies. So the real question over the next 12 months is, are we going to see normal weather, or is there going to be another unexpected weather event that severely affects production in one of the major producing countries? And with that, I'll hand over to David. Before I do, as Matt said, there is a short Q&A at the end, but if anyone doesn't have their question answered, feel free to reach out on the email address shown there, and I will try to give you an answer. But with that, David, I'll hand over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. All right. As you just mentioned, we're going to talk here about the weather products and data that ICE has available now and some future products that I think are really going to help in terms of assessing the risk for these events. So let's first talk about some of the products, both in terms of mapping and data that are currently available. I think one of the key products, especially in terms of long range, is what's known as the ECMWF SEAS model. SEAS for seasonal. And this model is key because you can use it to look out 6+ months into the future. And we have available now these products in both temperature and precipitation. What you're looking at here on the screen is a precipitation anomaly map. We have the data available for a lot of the key regions, in particular where you have some of the coffee production in Brazil, for example, up top, and Vietnam on the bottom. So, in terms of getting a long-range view, maybe because you want to kind of get an idea of where the market is in terms of this information, or just in terms of, getting early insight in terms of, what's going to happen, certainly we recommend taking a look at the ECMWF SEAS, widely considered the premier model. And not shown here, we have also a lot of the medium-range model too. The models that go out to 15 days, the GFS suite, the ECMWF suite, and we have many parameters for that data also. All right, in addition, if you need to drill in, if you need to look at the station level data, right? Let's say you're going to do maybe some of your own customized number crunching or internal analysis or whatever it might be. We also have a lot of this data in Station Form too, including global data, data stations in Brazil, such as Sao Paulo here. And like the top chart shows here, we have the forecast data, max and min forecast. We have other parameters too. That's max and min temperature. And on the bottom there, historic observations. We also have quite a comprehensive data set here, or historical data set. We have both METAR data, which right now goes out about a year or two of history. And we also have the CFSR data set, which is more comprehensive, more parameters, and we actually have that going out 20, in some cases 30 years of history. So plenty of station level data here, and there's more stations coming online all the time. All right, let's also talk about some of the products that are currently in development. And some of these products, frankly, we've developed with Steve in mind here in terms of really customizing it to meet the consumer's needs in terms of specialized events, like what's going on in Brazil with the coffee situation. So the first example here I'm going to show you in a minute is going to kind of show you more deterministically the risk for the different types of freeze events that are that have significant impact on the coffee production. The second one is more of a probabilistic analysis. All right, so let me show you the first one here first. Again, this is more of a kind of a standard forecast temperature map here. You can see the color scale on the bottom, the oranges and reds, hotter temperatures, the blues, cooler temperatures. By the way, this is an older map. This is not necessarily a real-time map. But what I want to highlight here is you have in the top right corner there the freeze thresholds that are, again, critical for the coffee production. By the way, I didn't mention what those thresholds are, but again, thanks to Steve, the thresholds that they've used in their analysis for severe, moderate, and light are at temperatures of -2, -1, and -0.5 Celsius. So that's how we define those thresholds. So on this map here, you can see how we contour those levels to make it really easy to, quickly assess where the threat is. All right, and this is our second example here. This is the probabilistic or risk assessment. And there's a lot here, but basically you have three types of events here: the severe on the left, the moderate in the middle, and the light on the right. And what we have here is the annotations and the colors here give you a objective or quantitative way to assess the risk. So let me drill in here to one of these maps. So this is the severe freeze event. All right, this was the map there on the left. And, zooming out for a second, you're looking at Brazil, and we have the state boundaries of Brazil. So this analysis or this type of map does two things for you. We can use sort of GIS, the geographical analysis, to kind of create our own areas or zones And in this case, again, we use the Brazilian states, but we can customize that to meet other needs too. And then what we do within those states is we aggregate the data, we aggregate the grid points, and assess the actual probability that that state or region is going to reach that critical threshold. So for example here, and again, this is sort of mock data just to highlight how to use this product. We have Sao Paulo at 26% and Parana at 52% for severe freeze. So what's nice, again, I would say the takeaway here is instead of having to just try to, maybe if you're familiar with, looking at some of these weather products, looking at an ensemble perturbation map or something like that and trying to subjectively understand what the risk is in some of these areas, this makes it easy for you. This quantifies it, gives you the objective information. In some cases, like I think this is a great example, it shows even in states that are very close together, the risk can be quite a bit different. All right, so again, this is a product that's coming shortly. The other thing I want to look at here before we close this out, we've talked a lot about the models, but of course, I think whenever you're assessing risk, and especially risk 3 to 6 months out, you always need to look at things like the climate signals, in this case, ENSO for La Nina or El Nino. The models, the numerical models, although much better than they used to be 10, 20 years ago, still do not fully capture some of these risks. So certainly we encourage things like looking at the ENSO, and this is a great analysis, complements of NOAA. It gives you sort of a global assessment for La Nina. And you can see, for example, in June, July, August, there is a relationship there with La Nina and drier than normal conditions across, in particular, southern Brazil, into southern South America in general. So folks who are following that, obviously we're in a La Nina now. There's some projections that we're going to weaken. We may go back to neutral. We may still be in a La Nina. Bottom line is something important to follow. The other two things I wanted to highlight here is that ICE will also be bringing some of this data online here too in the not too distant future. So we're going to have a lot of this data is available in index form, like in other words, they'll quantify ENSO from -3 to +3 or something like that. And we are going to be bringing a lot of that data online. And finally, our team here, our weather team, is, although we don't have a sort of a consulting type service here right now, we're always available to try to help you in terms of weather data needs, whether it's weather that we already have online, we're going to have online shortly, or if there's just public information out there that you need help sourcing. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Matt. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. And thanks, Steve. That was fantastic. In the interest of time, why don't we keep it to one question each? Steve, first question for you. What are the key weather periods going forward that we should be focusing on?
Yeah, good question. For 2022, first of all, I think it's worth focusing on geographical areas because, a weather issue in Uganda isn't going to be as problematic for, the global balance sheet as a weather problem in Brazil or Vietnam. So I think that, the key geographical areas are probably Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, Colombia. I think once you get below that, unless you treat Central America as one entity and there's a weather phenomenon that affects the whole of that region, then that narrows it down geographically. In terms of the sort of weather event that that could have a significant impact in Brazil, in 2014, for instance, we had dry weather in January, February, which is most unusual. No sign of that at the moment, so I think we can probably skip that. Beyond that, there's obviously the frost season, June, July, August, and then most important, I think, is probably the return of the rains in September, October, and the timing of that return, and also the volume of that return, and that will have a big impact in terms of Brazil. Vietnam, you're really looking at, it's a dry season now. It does what it says on the label, it's dry. The rains will return in April or May, and you don't want to have too much of a delay in the rains. The flowering will be brought on by irrigation in the next month or so, but you need natural rains, which tends to bring in cloud cover, reduce temperatures to allow the cherry development for the next crop. And beyond that, we're looking about the volume of rainfall during the rainy season. So I think Brazil and Vietnam are the two crucial areas.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve. Dave, a question for you. On your slides on risk of freeze events, how are those percentages generated?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I really didn't go through that too much. In terms of the methodology, we use the Ensemble suite of data. So, for example, the GFS Ensemble produces 30 perturbations. So for each of the grid points within each of those states, we'll calculate the probability that it was below a certain threshold. So, for example, I met 30 perturbations. If 15 of them were colder than that threshold, say of -2 Celsius, then the probability for that point would be 50%. And then what we do, we aggregate all those points within the state boundaries, and that's where we get the final number that's annotated there in the slides.
Okay, great. Why don't we end it here? Thanks again, Steve and David, and thank you to everyone for joining. Hope you all found it as informative as I did. Have a great afternoon or evening wherever you are. Thank you.